This week in Pure Reinvention.
I don't hire for experience. I hire for personality traits, the kind of things I can't teach. You have to be someone that wants to surprise and delight.
Episode 61, Phil Wrzesinski, President and CEO of the Toy House in Jackson, Michigan.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where our mission is to create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. I'm here with Misty Miller. How are you, Misty?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing good today.
You know, Misty, this is the first time we've started to venture out into a new world for us.
Well, I think it's exciting because we're talking not only to a small business owner, but to a guy who has been able to run and manage and lead the largest independent toy store in the country.
So for most of our interviews to date, they've been people that we've known within our circle of influence and that are close to us geographically. Now we're starting to move farther away geographically, and we're starting actually in this new and exciting time in 2016 to start really now also focusing on those for-profit businesses.
Phil has a great story. He has a lot of experiences. He's also taught or had public speaking opportunities where he's leading some of these ideas on how to stay relevant. So he has a lot to share with us.
I think one of the areas where we sometimes maybe forget the specific skill that's really important, and Phil brings this to light, is the importance of being a good entrepreneur. I think even when you are a leader of a large corporation, having that entrepreneurial thought process, that ability to think strategically ahead, to take risks, to own the next space, and to accept the risks and rewards that come with that. I think it's very fitting that we move kind of into this new space with a small business owner, an entrepreneur who has had to accept financially, intellectually, and professionally, the risks and rewards that go with whether you can make your vision a reality.
What I really heard in this interview was somebody who's learned a lot by doing, not just somebody who's read the books and heard the mantras, but really lived it and has the life experience to stand up to all of his advice and information. I'm
glad you really said that, because really I think our focus from here going forward, and I think it's been this way even as we've done our first 60, but really, really important going forward. These are not academics telling you what they think is the right way. These are people that have learned the hard lessons and have been able to distill through experience why this really works.
That sounds good. How about we listen in on the episode and see everyone at the end to talk about what we heard?
This episode is sponsored by Pure Reinvention Starters. If you want to learn how to set yourself apart from other future leaders, this is the place to be. For more information, www.purereinvention.com. Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention. We're here with Phil Wrzesinski, President and owner of the Toy House. Thank you, Phil, for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
This is a really exciting next step for the Pure Reinvention team, because a lot of times we've been working in the association world, in the not-for-profit world, and it's really nice to talk to what we would call a small business owner, a very successful small business owner, and the journey that they've been on. So thanks again for doing this. We've tried to start out all of our podcasts with the same questions, which are trying to understand a little bit more about you, Phil, and understand of the 5 fundamentals of the Pure Reinvention process. Which one do you most closely align with?
You know, I had a hard time as I was looking through that list and seeing what would really define me. But the 2 that stuck out the most is own and move. I am not a person that sits down and just talks about theories and stuff. My staff even knows this. If they come to me with an idea, my usual response is, great, run with it. Go on, move on, let's go, let's get something done. Don't sit around, don't wait for this, but own it too. It's yours. It is ours. Everything that happens in this business is me. That's kind of the fun part about being your own business, is it's all about me. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done. If I don't say, let's do something, let's move on. So I have to own it, and we have to do it, and we have to keep moving. That's the biggest thing in retail, especially right now, is we have to keep moving.
So we're going to come back to that, but tell us what your superpower is, Phil.
What most people will describe about me is I have the ability to take hard concepts and make them easy. I get a lot of positive feedback from the speaking that I do. I go around and I talk to retailers all around the country, and that's the one thing that they all come back to is they say, wow, I never understood it till you explained it that way. So that's been my biggest skill.
But having a superpower also means for everyone they also have their kryptonite. So what is your greatest fear?
Negativity. negativity. I am a very positive person. I don't like negative reviews. I don't like unhappy customers. I don't like people being upset. Those things eat away at me, and the best way I found to get through that is to just, as we said before, own it.
So you've learned a little bit about Phil, but Phil, tell us a little bit about the Toy House and what the Toy House is.
Well, we are a family-owned business started by my grandparents in 1949. So we go back a few ways. They bought a house and they put toys in the downstairs. They put offices in the upstairs and storage in the basement, and they called it the Toy House. And that's where we started. We've been now in this current building since 1967, and we are a 30,000 square foot building. For an independent toy store, that's as big as it gets. You will not find a larger independent toy store anywhere in the country. But when you look at our selection, we have about 30,000 different toys on the floor. You won't find a bigger selection of toys anywhere.
When you look at the retail business and the length of time you've been involved in the retail business, I think most of us have seen a lot of changes going on, but we really don't understand from an ownership standpoint what really the biggest disruptions are. So when you look at what the big disruptions have been to you in your retail business, what have they been?
It's basically been the competition and the way that's changed. When we look at the early competition that we started to face, the Toys R Us big box category killers as they were, that changed a lot of the way the independent business world ran in toys. That made us focus more on the specialty side of toys that Toys R Us wouldn't carry. When Walmart and Target really started to become major players in toys, now they're doing all the discounting, so we had to look at stuff that did things a little bit differently. What was nice, though, is that the toy industry is so big, it was easy to buy around those two companies and the discounters and the big box stores and find different ways, different products to compete with, different services to offer. The newest one, though, Amazon, has been a challenge that has been unlike anything else we've ever faced. This is a company that not only has everything that I sell, oftentimes they're selling it at the same or better price than I am, with free shipping, no taxes, and all these other advantages. So people can come in and they can shop my store, go buy it online, and move on from there. So that's a new competitor that we've never had to face before. That's been a big, big challenge.
Yet you're still smiling. So you must have figured out a way to navigate through those changing trends that we all have to deal with.
Well, there's a few things that they can't do. They can't make you smile. You never hear anybody really talk about, oh my gosh, I had the most wonderful experience shopping online. But you'll hear people say that about going to a store. You'll never hear somebody say, oh my God, it is the best to do this. You can have a neutral experience online. You can have a good experience online. You can have one that went better than expected online. But you don't get that wow factor.
So what you're beginning to describe is that while you could always find maybe the same commodity somewhere else cheaper, what they can't get is the value added that anyone can offer if they can understand what their value added is.
Exactly.
And in your case, the value added is the smile, the personality, and the extras that you do.
Well, the expertise, too. One of the things that you can get online is everything. What you can't get is a curator to tell you which of the everything will make the most sense for you.
So you go around the country and you speak to others who are in similar situations and listening to you and your guidance. What are some of the things that you say to these people when you're presenting information to them as they're looking to you for how to navigate through these changing times?
Well, one of the things that I like to focus on is to remind them that they need to leverage their own assets, that they need to do what they do better. One of the things that we hear all the time is every single retailer out there thinks they give great customer service.
Right, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. And that's the problem. There's no definition of great customer service. So one of the things that I will do to work with somebody is to say, let's define what great customer service really is. And the definition is pretty simple. Giving a customer exactly what she wants. Exactly what she wants is great customer service.
You know what's interesting, Phil, is the alignment of what I believe is a trend that you've described, which is the Amazon, the big box stores, the Amazons coming in and kind of commodity pricing. Yet I also see a huge trend as the post-boomer generations come in, they're actually willing to pay for an experience or to feel like they are part of something special as opposed to just getting the cheapest commodity out there.
You made the point, feeling special. That's kind of the key. Because we talk about great customer service. Here's the thing, great customer service alone, though, still isn't the calling card. So I'll talk to these retailers and I'll say, you give great customer service. What do you get in return? Your customer says, thank you. because you met her expectation. But there's no loyalty left. You gave her something, she gave you a thank you in return, and the transaction's done. If you really want to get your customers to come back, spend more money, you got to take it that next step. You have to give her not only great customer service, then you got to go a little bit more. You have to give her a little bit over the top of what she expected, and that's what causes delight.
The surprise factor.
Surprise and delight. When you give her something she wasn't expecting, that's when she starts to talk about you. That's when she feels special. That's when she says, this store gets me.
So I understand in the surprise and delight factor, which I really like, that you understand that. So if you are greeting every customer, if you are responsible for every transaction, this new strategy is going to work. But you have to work with a whole team of people who have to deliver that same exact deliverable experience. How do you get your team to buy into that, Phil?
It starts with the people that you hire. I wrote a book a few years ago about hiring because when I took over the hiring in the late 90s from my dad, I found out, this is a toy store. Christmas season's our big season. We hired about 10 to 12 seasonal people every year just to get through the season. And I would hire these people, get them trained up for the season, and then let them go after Christmas. What I found is that the first couple of years I did it, I sucked. I was not good. And I needed to come up with a better way. So I read every book on hiring, and they all said the same thing, hire for experience. And I found out that you can have 20 years of experience in retail and still be lousy at it because you work someplace that has no training program and has no expectation of how to deliver over-the-top great customer service. So I figured it out on my own that the deal is experience is nothing. Your personality is everything. I don't hire for experience. I hire for personality traits, the kind of things I can't teach. You have to be someone that wants to surprise and delight a customer. You have to be somebody that wants to help somebody and give them the kind of service that they need. If you don't have that innate trait in you that you are a person who wants to go out there and do something special for somebody else, you're not going to make it on my team.
So do you limit that selection to just the people who are interacting with your customers, or do you make sure that selection for personality is also the same thing we select for the person who's bringing the carts back in out of the parking lot, who's doing the bookkeeping, who's stocking the shelves?
The good news is every one of my staff does every one of those jobs. So yes, I do. I do look at every job, though, if I have a different job, like my office manager. When I needed to hire an office manager, the biggest trait I wanted was somebody that was OCD. I needed to have somebody that thought filing was the coolest thing in the world.
Right.
So we look at every job, and every job has specific traits that will make you successful in that job. And if you hire for those traits, you've got a leg up on everybody else in getting the right person into the right job. Now it's a matter of just training them your way of doing things.
Do you think that in the speaking that you've done to other business owners that's been something that's been very difficult for a lot of other people?
Well, a lot of the businesses that I talk to are small mom and pop shops where it's just the two of them and a nephew and their child and two high school kids that come in after school. So there isn't a lot of staff to work with, or there are a lot of people. I had a friend of mine who had a problem because his two employees were his dad and his nephew, and neither one was very good, but he couldn't fire them. So there are those situations sometimes. But when you have a staff, and if you really want to turn it from a hobby into a business, you have to be sometimes a little bit more calculating, a little bit more cold-hearted, and you have to find the ways to get the right people on board.
You mentioned in some of your earlier comments that one of the areas you felt you were attracted to in the Pure Reinvention process was ownership.
Ownership.
And obviously that ownership has to magnify itself down throughout your staff as well. You mentioned selecting for personality, yet you're prioritizing ownership. Is there a difference, and how do those two things work together?
I want them to own it. I want them to own it. It's important that we all buy in. We've had changes that I've wanted to do for years that I couldn't do because I knew I didn't have buy-in, that I didn't quite have, that I owned it, but I couldn't get my staff to necessarily own it. And so until I had a staff that was willing to and ready to own something, that's when the change is made, and that's when the change becomes full throughout the store and becomes something that we do automatically. We just changed our hours just this year. So we've got new hours, expanded hours going into the 2016. And in years past, I've been wanting to change this. We've been wanting to change these hours since 1995 but I didn't have ownership for my key people. This year, my key people came to me finally, and they said, what can we do? How can we help this out? So when I said, this is the plan, they said, great, let's go for it.
So how did you make sure that you were open to that ownership issue coming forward? So you wanted them to own it. They may or may not have, but you had to posture yourself that you were open to it when they brought it to you. And to me, I see a lot of people saying, I want ownership, but they're not necessarily behaving in a way that allows that ownership to take place.
I've done a lot of team building in the past. My experience early on in my life was doing team building projects and teaching others how to do team building. And I worked with adolescents, youth, worked with a few businesses, did a program that I set up for Domino's Pizza's entire management chain. So I've got a background in understanding how teams form, and when a team gets to its ultimate peak, they're doing the work, and you're reaping the benefits from it. And that's always been my goal with my team, is to get them to that ultimate peak where they're coming to me, where they are ready to go, and when they say, hey, this is what we want to do, I know they're going to do it. So that's always been something I've been dreaming of and looking forward to.
And how are they rewarded when they finally come to you with those great ideas and they're finally ready to own something new?
Have you ever read Daniel H. Pink's book, Drive? It's a fascinating book about motivation, and one of the things that people want that's helpful in motivation is autonomy. The ability to do their job without having somebody overlooking every single thing and nitpicking all the little details. So I like to give my staff autonomy. But the other one of the three things that he also gives is having a sense of doing something for a greater purpose. And that's what we try to get them to understand. We don't sell toys. Let me get that straight. We have toys, and you buy toys, but we don't sell toys. We sell experiences. We sell smiles. We make a difference in children's lives. We make a difference in people's lives. We make people happy. And my staff gets that. And when they realize they're not here to sell a toy, they're here to make a difference in somebody's life, then they see that greater purpose. And so then when we say, how can we do a better job of making a better difference in people's lives, they come up with these great ideas. It's not about selling toys. It's not about selling baby products. It's about making a difference. And that's the buy-in. That's the sense of a greater purpose.
Phil, I want to thank you. This has been an incredible, incredible interview. We want to thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
This has been Phil Wrzesinski, president and owner of the Toy House.
So right at the end of this interview, or close to the end, Phil mentioned that he wasn't able to make some real changes in his business until his key staff members came to him and said, we need to make a change. We're in. What do we do? And he shared his ideas. And you asked him, how can he stay open to that? And I think he had some really good advice, but I'm wondering, how do you encourage your staff to buy into those changes before they're ready? Because that happens.
No, I think that's a really interesting observation and question you have, Misty, because I think a lot of times what we see is the leader has it clear in their head what they want to do, and they kind of just push it to everybody else. They push it to the board, they push it to the staff, they push it to everybody else, and there's some degree of acceptance, but they either do that or they don't do anything at all. And what you are talking about, and I think you are right, Misty, is there's a kind of a gradual immersion that takes place. The leader may need to understand where they're going, the end, and then you have to really be able to look and assess your key staff, the people you work very closely with, and see if they're ready, and then immerse them in that part. And I think that's what Phil was teaching us. I think that's a key observation is, once the leader gets it, he has to look at the next group of people that are closely surrounding that individual, and then they have to be as invested.
So that brings up another point that I thought was pretty fascinating, and he talked to is, you're hiring for personality and hiring for those traits that you want. And if you have to train a little bit of skill or work on that, then you can deal with that. But getting those right people in the door is really important.
What a disruptor you are, Misty. That is a very disruptive thought. But I do believe there's a lot of merit in what Phil was talking about, because we do, for the most part, follow academically the thought process of hire for technical skills. And I think that we've not done a good enough job of finding that right balance. And I really appreciate Phil bringing that up and for you bringing that up, because I think all of us can do a lot better job of managing the different personalities that go into that success mix.
So that goes back further, or back to more of the beginning of the podcast when Phil described some of the core traits in our fundamentals that he aligns with. So he said own and move. And it makes sense because he said, I like to get it done, but I like to make sure I'm owning it or my staff is owning it along the way. But he also talked about taking those hard concepts and making them easy.
Yeah, and you're kind of going through those first three steps in the reinvention process. I mean, whether you jump around on any of the three, I think they're all very important. You've got to own it. You've got to simplify it. Interestingly enough, there's enough disruption in the world where sometimes you don't have to introduce that. But yeah, he was talking about owning it and simplifying it. And if you go back to the last comment you were talking about, Misty, ownership, the employees that you were talking about were ready for owning it, and he wasn't letting them. And by taking the vision to the next group of employees, you're letting them own it. And I think sometimes we forget we've got to let everybody own where we're going. Yeah,
you're right. And sometimes if you don't, you get pushback because they're not ready or they don't see the big picture. We hear that a lot. People need to see the more global thought process, and then they can understand their share and their steps to make it happen. And I think that those people help realize another great piece of advice that Phil gave us, which was find out what you do well and then do it better.
Yeah, I like you're playing into a person's strength. And I think so often we hear it all the time. I sat down with my boss, and he said, "These are the things you're not doing right, and I need to improve in." And then you try to do the reverse thought. Okay, so let's just play this out for a minute. What % of the time are you doing something wrong? Well, maybe 1 or 2%. Okay, so let me understand it. 98% of the time, you're doing the right thing. Okay, of that 98%, how much of your time in your performance review did you talk about the things you're doing right and how to do those better?
Yes, I love where you're going with this concept, and that's very disruptive thought too, Mr. Bills.
I have those. And it's the same concept, Misty, as the one you and I talked about starting with 2016 with creating a what not to do list. So it's hard sometimes to think about in a performance review, are we really talking about the 98% of the things you do really well and building off of those and making sure we do more of those? Now, I do have to remind you there are some things we need to work on. But I do appreciate the 98% because I think we get it backwards. We focus on the 2% that we're doing wrong. I don't even want to know what % my team thinks I do wrong. I really don't even want to know.
Well, and it stifles growth because then you're just so worried about fixing your missteps. You haven't celebrated, recognized, and nurtured all of the right things you're doing.
And we all have those things we need to be working on. But I think what Phil was pointing out in this entire conversation with his team and the degree of success and how you add value, it all goes back to, are you really focusing on that high percentage of things that the business is doing right, the things that are unique, the way you connect with the customer, and you get away from the negativity of the 2% of what you're doing wrong.
I'm glad you talked about negativity because I just wanted to say one last thing about Phil's comment. His fear is negativity. And I think that's something we haven't really delved into, but it's an interesting topic. When you think about the naysayers out there, especially when you're trying to change something, you're up against some tough critics. It might be your board, it might be your spouse if you're running a small business, it might be friends and family or your staff, but there's always that negativity you're fighting. So do you have any advice for people that are navigating that?
Here's my experience, and I think you would agree. Anytime we have a disruption, and the world has become somewhat disruptive, but anytime we have a disruption, that disruption tends to create some space. And that space is where we're allowed to grow. Now, granted, space makes us nervous. Space makes us fearful. And when we're afraid of, or when we don't know what goes into that space, the first thing we think of is negative. Remember, we just talked about the 2% of the space that we focus on? Well, space makes us nervous, and space makes us want to be negative. But what if we could think about space being the place where I can grow?
Embrace the space.
Yes. If I could get some space to start to grow from, then while it's disruptive, it is where I can go to the next step. Now, if I don't have any space, I can't grow, and I can't make a positive change. So disruption is not intended to be something to make everybody upset. Disruption is intended to give you the space necessary to own whatever's next. And so we've got to try to do a better job of helping people see that disruption isn't a negative in terms of what it creates in terms of bad things, but that disruption simply creates the space for us to do what's next.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
It was wonderful, Misty. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Mike. If you are ready to make a change it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.